again, and welcome back. This is Dead Money with Dan Arfin, bringing you part 2 of episode 1. Or you can just call it episode 2. It doesn't really matter what you call it. What's important is that you're listening. So these are the hand histories that should have made me cry all day December 22nd, but they didn't, because I think I've done enough crying over the years because of poker. But anyway, so I'm playing at the Wynn on a Saturday, December 21st. After about 5 or 6 hours, I was really bored again, so I walked over to Resorts World to try and get the 5-5 game going, which has a $2,000 max. I knew the game was pretty unlikely to run, but I didn't care. So I get in there and I wait a short while to see if anything happens, but then I started to check out mentally when it didn't look like anything was going to happen, so I decided I'll just play like an hour of 1-3 and then I'll go home. Well, about 5 minutes into doing that, the floor lady comes over to me and says that the 2-3 game has just converted itself to 5-5 and that a seat was open, so she offered it to me. I said yes, already knowing that I had kind of shut off my mind to playing my regular game for the rest of the day. But it was not because I didn't want to get hours in. I just figured it wasn't going to happen, so in spite of my hesitation, I said yes. The original plan was to play, and I knew this was going to be a good game because it started with a bunch of guys who showed up to play 2-3, but now they're kicking it up. There was just one other problem, though. You see, one of the guys in the game happened to be the person who I utterly detest more than anybody I've ever played poker with. And that is not a small statement, because poker is an everyman's game. Every type of person shows up to play, from gangsters to grandmothers.
Hey, homie.
So you get a wide range of slime. But there is nobody I'd rather never sit with again than this guy.
Get out.
He's a white guy, of course. I mean, what else would he be? You know what? Just assume every villain I talk about is a white person, unless otherwise noted from now on. He plays in streaks recreationally. He's basically a whale pre-flop, so he gives a lot of action. He definitely tilts. But post-flop, he's not really that bad. He for sure has some know-how. Now, the reasons I hope he dies, moves away from Vegas, is because he's one of those people who never stops talking but never says anything interesting. He just has total diarrhea of the mouth. He still acts like he's in high school, talking unnecessarily loud when he's trying to say something funny, which of course it isn't. He even makes these little racist comments sometimes. He slow rolls people. So, he's just one of those players whose objective is to irritate others so that they play bad, and that is something I've always thought has no place in poker. And I'm not some oversensitive baby here. I'm a fucking New Yorker who used to bomb pretty consistently in their comedy clubs. What do you think that was like? So I'm all for being cutthroat and showing no mercy to anyone, but that's within the context of the game itself. This is a war, whether you like it or not, and we are on a battlefield, so there's no friends. But at the same time, poker is very much a gentleman's game, and a little respect goes a long way with any person who's ever heard of what integrity is. That doesn't mean you need to pass a behavioral etiquette class to get into the game, but if you're someone who's outwardly disrespectful every chance you get, I don't want to play with you. I'm not getting down on my knees to suck some whale's cock all in the name of his juicy action. I don't care how much they're willing to lose. They're not worth it to me. I don't need their money because it's not going to make me as happy as it will to just never see them again. The money itself is not where I derive the satisfaction from poker. It's beating the shit out of people at the table, no matter what it takes to do it. And oftentimes that just means sitting there like a lump, bleeding and folding all day, appearing harmless. May not look like you're kicking their ass, but looks can be deceiving. So, all right, whatever. You got the message. This guy is just a dirty player across the board, but what can you do? There's people out there like that. Life is hard and people have to get it out somehow, so some of them do so by being assholes at poker. I know there's plenty of people who probably think he's good for the game, because I certainly won't deny he injects energy into the game, and that, of course, is never a bad thing. So he's probably just the love or hate type, but that could also just depend on how you're doing that day, because there's always going to be some people in the game that think he's funny because when people are winning, they think everything is funny. And when's the last time you were in a full game where not one person was winning? But if just seeing this guy wasn't tilting enough for me already, I mean, it's like every day I show up that he's there. He always has all the chips. I've seen him tilt, but I almost never catch him on a bad day. He always has fucking piles. Now, the last thing I'll say about him that makes me want to learn how to kill a person with my bare hands is he has kind of like a high-ish pitched voice. Whatever you want to call it, it's constantly piercing. And since I'm not going to use his name out of respect, not respect for him, just for the rest of the world by not having to hear me pronounce his name, let's just call him Squeaky. So Squeaky is in the game, and to his left is a friend of his who I'd played with once before. He's tall and kind of lanky looking, but it's hard to say because I've never actually seen him stand up. He was drinking a little bit and being not quite as obnoxious as Squeaky, but, you know, that's not telling you very much. But he was certainly giving it his best shot. Now, up until this game, I played mostly fine against Squeaky. I mean, nothing happened that was especially regrettable. And for a time, he knew I hated him because most people do. But one day it became clear that he didn't like me either, and I was glad about it once I realized that I was also getting on his nerves. Because one day, I actually did try to be sincerely a little engaging with him when I asked what he did. And he said, "I work." I said, "You work? Okay. Is there anything more you'd like to add, or should I guess?" Can't remember much of what was said after that, but something tells me it wasn't of much progress between us. Now, since that time, I think I grew on him a little. Very little. And I wouldn't say he exactly grew on me. It was just more like I found him to be slightly less intolerable for a temporary period, which ended well before this session started. But I was still managing to feign the image that I wouldn't relish the opportunity to see him eaten alive by a crocodile. I know that was an elephant, not a crocodile, but if I had things my way, that's what a crocodile would sound like. So I'm in the game and those two fucking idiots are bantering incoherently to themselves and everybody. And I was fine enough with ignoring it today because I know I'm going to be out of here in like a couple hours anyway. But then Squeaky's buddy opens to 25 from under the gun. Squeaky had the next action, and he made it 75. Folds to me, and I got kings on the button. We're all about 1,500 effective. And because Squeaky is such a whale pre-flop, I think 4-betting to isolate him is really the only move. Obviously, cold 4-betting is going to be the high-frequency move anyway, but I actually do think there is some merit to just calling kings in position in this spot, because for starters, since this is clearly a trap, it could induce the original raiser to 4-bet bluff if he's the type that would do that, which I didn't really think Squeaky's buddy was like. There's really not too many players like that in the Vegas 2-5 pool anyway, but they do exist sometimes. And if you call, you know, I might just induce a 4-bet from strong hands that king still has crushed, but just doesn't want to play the pot multi-way. And the last reason calling can play well here is specifically if the open raiser and or the 3-better is very nitty pre-flop, and also at least somewhat competent and disciplined. Cold 4-betting the kings just kind of opens the door for them to play perfectly. It gives them a really solid chance to now fold the value hands you have crushed, or they'll just have aces. And if they do, then they're just going to go about their business however they want, which is probably 5-bet. Most of the 2-5 field doesn't trap with aces under any circumstances. It's kind of hilarious. But the main point of the matter is, I think most players still have a lot of trouble getting away from kings pre-flop, even when they're quite certain their opponent has aces. So if you cold call in this situation, you at least widen the 4-betting range. Whereas 4-betting yourself will largely strengthen their continuation range, making it harder for you to stack them, but easier for them to stack you when they have the cooler. So alright, I considered calling, but the 3-better is already a pre-flop whale, so after Squeaky made it 75, I made it 170 on the button, which is too small considering how deep we are. and that Squeaky was the 3-better. I think sometimes I worry a little too much about making everyone fold when I have these really big hands, so I err on the side of going too small to make sure they don't, but this size was unnecessary. My raise was basically half pot, so I can definitely afford to go bigger than that to say at least 200, maybe even a little more. But I should add that Squeaky is capable of folding a strong hand if he thinks you're the type who will never be light in a particular spot. And I've been pretty sure for a little while that this is how Squeaky has perceived me. So when I sat down, in the back of my mind, I was already prepared to run a big bluff at him if a good opportunity came up. And with that in mind, it may have also influenced me sizing this far down with a hand this big. But this hand wasn't going to be about Squeaky because now the original raiser reaches back and he 5-bets to 400. Holy shit. Squeaky folds. Normally, Squeaky's buddy was opening to 15 or 20, and this time he used 25, which may seem insignificant, but on more than just a few occasions, when I've seen people size up their normal open by just one extra big blind, they either had a huge hand or at least a pretty huge hand. I don't read into this as much as I used to because oftentimes this subtle difference doesn't change their range that much, but it is something I recommend keeping an eye out for, especially if the open raiser is really nitty. But regardless of what his opening size was, this looks mighty strong, of course. He raised under the gun and has now 5-bet someone who has just cold 4-bet the 3-better who also acted from early position. Now, oftentimes we'll find ourselves in spots where if you get stacked by the cooler, it's either not a mistake at all or only a small mistake, whereas folding would have been potentially a huge mistake, so you just went with it. But in this era of poker, I feel this particular scenario has tilted more and more towards the opposite. The 2-5 pool is oftentimes just so painfully nitty before the flop. So many players just want to see cheap flops as much as they can. In position, out of position, they don't care. They just want to try and make them nuts and stack people, and they're simply not interested in beefing up the pot pre-flop unless they're nutted. And in the last few years, there have been 6 times, 6, where I really wanted to fold kings pre-flop. Still got 300 big blinds in and was against aces 4 times and lost all 4. And you know what I was against the other 2 times? Kings. I just hardly ever see people getting heaps in before the flop with anything but kings or aces. And this has been going on for a while. You know, I hear people talk about, oh, we could have ace-king, you could have ace-king. People limp in with ace-king suited like semi-regularly. It's not unusual to see. They don't even want to raise, they don't even want to have a single raised pot with that hand. Unless they have to. You think they're getting 300 big blinds with it? I don't think so. So if someone 5-bets you, or even just a 4-bet, and you know they're really trying hard to win and not overvalue hands or make big mistakes, they're going to have aces or kings quite a bit. I mean, it's gotten to a point where I'm starting to think getting in 300 big blinds or even 200 big blinds against certain players with kings is just a punt. I've told this to people. Now, I've also told them that, you know, when it is time to make an exception, you'll probably know. Like if a guy is tilting or if he thinks you're being really aggressive or if he's just a whale and he just wants to play for piles as much as he can. Then in those spots, I'm comfortably going to go with kings for a lot of money. But if the circumstances aren't something close to ideal, I mean, I would say folding kings pre in a 5-bet 2-5 situation, it's become relatively necessary. Now, I know Squeaky's friend isn't a pro, but he's definitely trying. He's not getting the money in that light. But between his large open size from under the gun and 5-betting me when I was the cold 4-better, I just figured he's got it. I mean, I could just call since we would still have about another 1,100 behind, but I figured whatever he's 5-betting, he's just going to go with. So this was all in or fold territory. And he looked like he was ready to go, and I have just been snap called in this spot way too many times. So I fucking folded, and he shows me a queen. Unfucking believable. I don't know what the other card was, but he said I was calling if I went with it. So If all that's true, then I guess he just decided to go haywire with queens, which if so, it makes him a much worse player than I thought, because a huge percentage of the time he is just jamming right into kings or aces, and most people aren't going to fold kings. Now, in addition to the 6 times I regrettably did not fold kings pre, I have folded it a few other times in the past few years, twice in 1 week. In those situations, I either got confirmation they had aces or I just never found out. And while I was wrong this time, if I fold kings pre, I don't have to be correct 100% of the time to turn it into a profitable fold. I don't know what it has to be. What is it? The low mid 80s, maybe more? But when you make this decision and you're wrong, it hurts pretty bad. So I was, of course, completely frazzled and beside and sick with myself. I, of course, didn't announce what I folded. I just tried to act like I had nothing to be suicidal over. And then the very next hand I get is aces.
Wow.
Okay. So let's just try this again. This time the straddle is on. Squeaky limps in for 10, and once again I size down. Holy shit, I might be the worst. You ever find that poker is just a lot easier to take once you just admit to yourself that you are the nut low? It really takes the pressure off. So anyway, I opened to 40, which, it's not that small. Theoretically, it's not incorrect, but I can easily get away with going much bigger. One guy calls behind me, and Squeaky calls. So we've got 140 in the pot, which comes Jack 10-8 rainbow. You can do a lot worse than this, but this really isn't quite the flop you have in mind with aces. If you're not beat, you will often be against a variety of high equity hands, so there's going to be a lot of turn cards or rivers you're not going to be happy to see. I obviously don't want to be check raised, but I would still bet this flop against nits because they won't raise unless they for sure have aces beat. But Squeaky can check raise here wide enough that I'd rather not deal with that predicament, so I check to take that away from him and also just to see what the guy behind me does. The player in position in this hand was fishy, and I felt I would probably learn more about his range by seeing what bet size he uses, if any, than I would if I had just bet myself. And plus, checking flop with strong hands I just think performs very well in general. I mean, it induces a lot of responses that work out for you because most players expect you to do what they would do with what they consider a strong hand on the flop, and that is bet. But he checked as well, so we get to the turn, which is the 6 of spades. And now Squeaky bets 115. I'm already getting a little anxious again, but I called. The other guy folded. And the river was the 4 of spades, which was dramatic because it completed the backdoor flush, but I did have a spade. But now Squeaky bets 315 into 370, which is pretty big. It's 85% of the pot. And at this point, I don't think I'm beat. I know I'm beat this time. I know I just made a brutally wrong fold with kings literally moments before this, but this is different. Squeaky's sizings have always been pretty consistent, and when he bets big, he just has it. And this is true of a ton of players, especially when they're having a good day and nothing has gone disastrously wrong. And this was especially shitty because with that size, he has a flush. He's capable of value betting worse than a flush, but not for that size. So I was leaning heavily towards folding, but then I started thinking. I said earlier that I was thinking I'd run a big bluff at Squeaky tonight, so here's my chance. I actually already had a couple small chances earlier in the night, but I passed on both of them, so now, of course, the one I do want to go after is when I'm quite sure I'm going after the top of his range, but as I also said, he's capable of folding big hands, and he has against me correctly in the past, so if people start folding to you, the adaptative exploit is to bluff them. And given the way I've played this hand, it's pretty hard to think I'm bluffing. Because what dry ace of spade hands do I get here with that didn't bet the flop? Could I have ace king or ace queen? I mean, not likely. I know I'd be betting those hands on the flop pretty often, maybe even more than I should. I guess I can have ace jack or ace 10. I don't know if Squeaky's going to think I'm going to check ace jack. But a lot of times when I do jam here, I mean, I am just going to have the nuts with a suited ace that didn't connect well with the flop, but called the turn because it picked up the draw. I went back and forth about this I didn't tank like especially long, but I was going back and forth because this really felt like a dangerous move. I mean, I really thought, though, that he was just going to have a hard time calling, so I went for it and jammed. I would prefer this jam be huge, like well over the size of the pot. in this case, it was not. It was only about 800 on top of his bet. So it was only about 80% of the pot. But this was not just some spaz blow up because of the wrong fold I just made. My thinking was very clear in this hand. If it wasn't, I probably would have just bet the flop. So Squeaky is thinking and he's sighing, does not look happy. And he made this comment about how he was going to call until I started doing some show. So I don't know, apparently he thought I was Hollywooding, which I guess makes sense because I was going back and forth about this, so that may have been revealed physically in some way. Not to mention, of course, whenever people are doing this whole little pondering, what do I do? Then they go all in. They tend to have the nuts. Now, if you thought me folding kings the hand before was unthinkable and crazy, well, check this. Squeaky shows me the king of spades and folds, and he 100% had a flush, okay? He was not wasting our time with either a king-high bluff or some stupid one-pair hand. He had the second nuts. And I couldn't resist showing him the bluff because I hate him too much. First, I showed him the ace of clubs, and then I showed him the spade. I should have done it in the reverse order, but either way, I still showed him the bluff. And because this had been a 2-3 game, I'm guessing at least half the table probably thought what I did was like just really bizarre, to check the flop with aces and then jam the river after the flush came in. I'm guessing some of them didn't even realize that this was a bluff. Squeaky was completely disgusted and sick with himself. He's on the other side of the table. He's talking to his buddy. He's saying it's the worst fold he's ever made. He should have just fucking called, blah, blah, blah. So it was glorious. So the read was correct that Squeaky is willing to fold to me. I mean, my goodness, look what he just folded. I just can't believe it, though. I mean, I don't know how he thinks there's like no chance I'm bluffing or maybe even just jamming a flush smaller than his. So yeah, it was extremely lucky. I know that. But you know what? You make your own luck. Probably just had king 3 or one of his other stupid hands he's always getting in there with and makes a monster once again, but this time he leveled himself. Now, even though I gained some redemption with that play, I mean, I was still very upset with myself about folding the kings the hand before. And on top of that, I was already partially wishing I hadn't even shown this bluff because doing that has caused me more problems than it has solved. I almost never show bluffs anymore because it just fucks with my head too much and it makes me think players are playing back at me to get revenge or something, but they aren't. Their ranges are the same. And how many times I've been in spots where I would normally just fold, but I level myself into making some stupid call. But it's too late now, so gotta deal with it. Squeaky is super tilted, so that's a good thing. If I can catch a hand against him, then things could get ugly for him. So the straddle is on again, and someone opens to 30. I got queen 10 of hearts. I make it 100. Squeaky cold calls, as he often does, from the big blind, and we go heads up. I have position. Pot has like 240. Flop is jack 8-6 with 1 heart and 2 diamonds, so I got a gut shot and a backdoor flush to go with my over. Squeaky check calls 140. Pot is up to 520. The turn is an offsuit 5. He checks again, and I don't think I want to keep bluffing him here, which is another reason why I don't like showing bluffs, because now it just makes me afraid to try it again, whether it's a good spot to or not. So I take the free card. I hit a 10 on the river for a pair, and now he bets 475. This is 90% of the pot, and normally I never, ever call Squeaky here. Ever! He just has it. I folded him to these spots over and over and over again. He never shows me a bluff. You know he's going to, if he could. So whatever he has, it's something good. But because I showed him the freaking bluff before, I convinced myself he could be bluffing me back. So even though I didn't want to, I just sheepishly tossed him the call, and he says, good call. I only have a set of 10s. Now, it's gross enough that he slow-rolled me and that I actually fell for it, because for a moment I actually did get excited. And that's with knowing he does this, so I should have been expecting it. But, oh my God, I mean, that was literally a one-outer on the river. Not to give him the best hand, of course, he had me beat all the way, but a one-outer which created the possibility of me paying him off, since every other river gives me a better hand or just nothing. But no, of course, like not even an hour later, after I bluff him off the second nut flush, this incredible case 10 hits the river with both of us in there and creates a situation where I might actually consider calling him light, where he once again has a monster. Not long after that, I quit finally, having lost a few hundred. But it was this 3-hour session that caused me all the endless poker misery I felt that night and the next day. Because remember, I started all this out by saying I was hesitant to sit down in this game in the first place. Mentally, I had already checked myself out and forced myself just enough to check back in. And since they say 2 out of 3 ain't bad, well, that means 1 out of 3 ain't good. So it's not a coincidence that in this stretch where I had 3 critical decisions to make, I got 2 of them wrong. One of which is something hardly anybody would have gotten wrong. And even though the one thing I did right, hardly anybody would have done either, those 2 hands, the kings and aces, back to back, forget about what stakes I've ever played. Those 2 hands have got to be the wildest back-to-back hand sequences I've ever played. And I was so pleased with myself that after folding kings incorrectly, that I was still able to keep presence of mind with clear thinking and followed up the very next hand by making one of the sickest river moves I've ever made. Only then to find out I did so into a hand that needs to just call it off and live with whatever I turn over. And then that hand folded anyway. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Happens every day, though. You got to see these hands to believe them. So then I'm all proud of myself and now letting my ego get to me, playing against Squeaky, who I hate more than anybody, showing him I turned aces into a bluff. Only to find myself an hour later calling it off like an idiot on a river that had the literal minimal likelihood of showing up to create the scenario, and then falling for the slow roll on top of it. So, as I told you in episode 1, spent all day Sunday angry at myself and realized I need to just go to the Bellagio to try and relax. Then I got really high while I was playing with a table that was very quiet, and that's when it hit me I need to just restart the show. But after about an hour and a half of playing with this very pleasantly quiet table, I table changed because the game was also really boring. Not just the fact that there was no action, there was no energy in this game. I mean, sometimes the action can be tame, but the table at least feels alive. This one did not. And that's when I strongly advise switching tables if you can. So I do that, and as soon as I sit down, it was like night and day. I mean, this new game was alive. And there were a couple of big stacks, too, from guys who looked extremely fishy, but also happy and cocky since they had piles in front of them in a game where the max buy-in is only $500. And I was instantly rewarded for my table change. To make a long story short, I called a raise with pocket deuces. The flop went 7 ways. The flop came 9-7 deuce. I checked somewhere in the middle position. There was a bet, a raise. I jammed, probably about 500 total, maybe less. I got called and hit quads on the river for a double up. Easy game. Yay! So now I'm fairly deep with these 2 big stacks, but after that I went card dead for a little while. Until then, 2 guys limped from early position. Then a reg raised to 30, and I had queens, so I make it 100. And the big blind called, and one of the limpers called. The limper who called was one of the big stacks, so this pot has $330 since the original raiser folded, and the flop came 2-3-6 rainbow. They checked to me, and this is one of those flops that could be a lot of trouble. I mean, it's always a little hard to range people when they either cold call a 3-bet or limp cold call a 3-bet. In this case, both of those things happened. I suppose small, medium pocket pairs are the likeliest hands to play like this, and if that's the case, then this flop smashed that range, but I don't see that much check raise bluffing in 3-bet pots, so whatever, I'll just cross that bridge when I get there and keep the party going, so I bet 150. The big blind folded and the limper called. The turn paired the 6, and it was the second heart, and now he bets into me for 200. Wasn't thrilled about that card, but given how small he went, I wasn't too concerned about it yet, so I called. Now the river comes, and it's a joyful ace. Not a heart. But he bets again, 380 into 1,030. This is pretty shitty, but it seems kind of hard to avoid paying this one off. I'm getting a pretty sick price, and fish tend to size down when they're bluffing. I mean, this card could give me aces full, but most of the time I'm just going to have an overpair before the river. So I thought this might be a card he'd think about bluffing since I usually won't like it, so I call and he's got the ace-4 of clubs. So he limped in and cold called the 100 with still the original raiser to act. He check called the flop with an overcard, a gut shot, and a backdoor flush draw. He totally bricked the turn and fired this little bluff that was never going to get a fold, and then he hit this garbage on the river and got called again. Now, as far as what bluffs he might turn over, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe 4s or 5s, maybe 4th race suited. Who knows? You see a whole variety of stupid hands when people play the way he did before the flop. So I think the real question is, what is he doing on rivers that don't improve him? Like if the river is just some offsuit 8, is he going to fire again or just give up? You'd think once he bluffed the turn, he's going to at least be inclined to bluff the river, but who knows? When you go up against people who play hands this way, I mean, they can really surprise you sometimes at what spot they end up betting or checking or calling or folding or especially raising. Now, since I called that river, I would have called just about any river, at least for that size. That's where I was leaning when I called the turn. So if he had made his straight, I probably would have called that too, unless he just went massively bigger. So on we go into the overnight, and the under the gun reg opens to 20. I flat next action with 3s. Really don't like doing this, but 2-5 in general, and especially this game, it doesn't have that much 3 betting, so you can get away with trying to see cheap flops with these small pairs. 2 more players call. We get to the big blind, and of course, he's the one who raises to 120. Now, this was the other deep stack at the table, and he and I were deep enough that I was comfortable navigating with this guy post-flop, with or without a set. So he and I ended up going heads up. So the pot had $300, and the flop was 10-8-7 rainbow, and he bets $25, 1/12 of the pot. Okay. Now, this guy, I didn't think would ever do this with any strong hands, so I figured I should have him beat pretty often. But if so, then why is he betting to begin with? I mean, I didn't want to level myself too much, so I just raised to 150, thinking this will probably end the hand. So, of course, he called. And the turn was a jack, and he checks. There were still no flush draws, and my live read on the guy was telling me something, but I wasn't really sure what, because it didn't seem like he hated that card, but he also seemed a little tense, like he wasn't sure what he was going to do if he faced a bet. So I thought about this for a little bit and decided I'm just going to check and see what he does on the river, and if it's a river I don't have a problem with and he checks again, then I'm just going to overbet jam and try and rep some sort of trap I had by checking turn. The overbet wouldn't be massive, but I had a good 750, so that's at least 1.25x pot. I had still been fairly quiet since joining this table, so I thought I would get credit, making it unnecessary to risk bluffing the turn when I wasn't sure. So I check back, and he immediately checks the river dark, and okay, that'd be a green light to make this maneuver. There is no way he's checking a straight or a set or anything substantial in the dark, but then the river is a 3. Wow. You know, the funniest part about this hand is I was actually like mildly disappointed that now I rivered what is definitely going to be the best hand, because I was really looking forward to sticking it in as a bluff here. But now because I hit a gin card, now I have to value bet instead. Oh, poor me. Now, since I was going to jam for the bluff, and obviously I need to size down for value as the other side of this exploit, so I bet 1/3, which was 200, and he snap calls with ace-jack. All right, so now his entire line at least made sense as far as what he was thinking. He bet so tiny on the flop, not because he completely whiffed at ace-king, it's because he had a gut shot and 2 overs, so he didn't want to like check and face a bet, so he throws out this tiny little bet, which was still good enough for him to call a raise, even though there's a chance he could be totally fried. But then he tensely checks the turn because he turned top pair, which simultaneously created the 4-liner straight. He didn't know what he was going to do about that. Then he checks the river dark since he figures he doesn't know what he's going to do and apparently just doesn't want to tempt himself into betting, but it looked like a total brick. He saw a small bet, so he just called it. I didn't really know what hands I was targeting. I just knew I couldn't go too heavy, but given that he snapped, then all that does is make you think you could have gone bigger, and I probably should have gone at least 300, maybe even 350. So this hand probably changed the table's perception of me. I mean, you would think so. I don't think anyone thought I was doing anything except nut peddling to that point, so the last thing they expected was to see that I'd raised the flop with threes, which then connected with the river. The funniest part of all is everyone probably just assumed I was going to lose this hand if I didn't cash the three, and while the three was obviously lucky to give me the best hand and a chance to get another bet in, the truth was I was probably going to win this hand on just about all rivers. I mean, nobody knows the unknown. You know, he may have gotten stubborn if he caught an ace or a jack, but no one had any idea that rivering a set threw a wrench into my plan, which was to bluff jam. So now it's about 4:30 a.m. I still got about 1,200 in front of me, and a new player joined from a broken game. White guy, glasses, headphones, very nerdy and reggy looking. He had straddled once or twice, but other than that, not much happened with him. So now under the gun opens to 20, I got aces and I make it 60, and this new guy on the button calls it cold, and the razor calls, so it goes three-way. The flop was king 10-4, two clubs. I did not have a club. The open razor checked, and I checked, and the button checked. I'd be checking a lot of hands on this flop, so I think checking aces makes sense to do it with also, and oftentimes I'll check the flop anyway whenever I have someone cold call my 3-bet with position on me. There's obviously value to be gained by betting since a lot of 2-5 players will check back hands they call with, so it's great if you can charge them, but betting here is also going to look really strong, so I decided to just get a little tricky and see what happens. If the button checks back the flop also, then he probably has a hand that's going to be hard to get 3 streets from anyway, but check and flop also may increase the chances of getting 1 or 2 streets instead of none or 1. Turn was a 5. The original razor checked again. This time I bet 75, and now the button raises to 215. Folds back to me, and once again I'm hating life. When people check back the flop and then the raise the turn, this is very often a huge hand. And if this happened at 4:30 in the afternoon instead of the morning, I think I probably just get away from it right here, but this time I didn't want to do it this time. I mean, you just see too many wild things going on at this hour of the night. And with no real information on the guy, I decided to just re-raise all in, because to do so was only about another 400 more. It's about 2/3 of a raise. And he snapped calls, but not with a set of 5s or 5s and 4s. No, he had a set of kings. Okay then. There it is, when we talked about before, cold calling kings pre-flop, after there's been a 3-bet in front of you. Obviously, very surprising, he didn't cold 4-bet. If he had, the result would have just been the same. As played, I actually had my one chance to get away from this, but I don't know. I don't really know what to say about this one. I mean, it's always tough when you have predicaments against someone who is pretty new and you don't really have any information to work with yet. So for the second time in this game, I was up a nice chunk, but lost it all back in one big pot. First the queen's getting cracked by ace-4, and now this one. This guy flopped top set in position in a multi-way pot on a draw-heavy flop, but he still checked. You don't see that every day, but you see things you don't see every day, just about every day in poker, so maybe I shouldn't act so surprised. But after that hand, I was pretty demoralized. I mean, I was planning to be there another couple hours, but I called it within probably another 15 minutes. It was a bit of a disappointing session since it looked like I was going to have a satisfying night or better at a couple different times, but both times it all came apart in one fell swoop. It's okay though. The important part was the revelation that it's time to get back on the air, so I'll be talking to you again soon about some more interesting hands I played, and also have more stories of the indescribably ludicrous things that came out of the faces from the countless number of blithering idiots I had the displeasure of playing poker with. Bye, everybody.